refugees represent that diamond in the rough. Refugees are incredibly entrepreneurial, incredibly hardworking. They tend to be extremely resilient because they've gone through displacement and often rebuilding their lives. But often as a refugee, you don't have the option to just put something aside if once it gets difficult.
About 26% of the global population's refugees are in sub-Saharan Africa. So what country would you say has very friendly refugee policies?
In Africa, you do have very progressive refugee policies. I mean, Uganda is a really interesting example of a country that has taken in, literally millions of refugees.
If you had $1 billion today, how would you use that money to change the fate of refugee investors? Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on yet another episode of the African Checkbook. Africa has 12 million people living as internally displaced or refugees. Often, these people are seen as a burden to the host nations. Today, we are going to have a very interesting discussion where we will see refugees from a different lens, a lens of bringing dignity, opportunity, and seeing refugees as partners for economic growth. On my discussion today, I'm joined by Danny, who has worked for many years with refugees and is going to steer this conversation into understanding how refugees can be economic partners to the host nations. Thank you for joining us today, Danny.
Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Thank you.
Exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. I think this is a very interesting topic, and I believe most of our listeners would want to really understand how refugees can be partners.
Great.
For economic growth. And so you could start by introducing yourself, telling us what you do and how you got to work with refugees or how you found yourself in Africa.
Sure. So my name is Danny Cutherell. I'm the Africa Director for the Refugee Investment Network, or we call it RIN. And I've been working for RIN for the last 3 years, based here in Nairobi. Prior to that, I was working for a Canadian NGO, also working with refugees, but in a slightly different context for about 7 years before that. So I've been living in Nairobi for the last 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And then my work with refugees goes back a little further than that. Prior to living in Kenya, I was based in Pakistan, so working with Afghan refugees in southwestern Pakistan and Balochistan.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, and I guess my interest or engagement with refugees goes all the way back to my childhood. I actually grew up in Pakistan.
Okay.
My parents worked there ever since I was a small child. And so when I was growing up, I interacted with a lot of mostly Afghan refugees that during the 1980s, there was a large displacement of Afghans into Pakistan. And so I was around refugees a lot when I was younger. And one of the cool things about my experience as a kid is I would often see refugee entrepreneurs everywhere. They'd be starting small businesses and shops or selling chips on the side of the road or whatever. Incredibly entrepreneurial, and I think that's sort of carried through to that sort of the way I think about refugees has sort of carried through to the work that we're doing with RIN now.
Okay. All right. And from your assessment, after working with refugees in Pakistan and in Africa, is the environment the same? Is it different? Or what would you say is different between those two?
Yeah. So it's been quite a while. I mean, like I said, I've been here in Kenya for the last 10 years. It's been quite a while since I worked on the refugee situation in Pakistan. I know that that situation continues to be dynamic with the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. Some of these displacement issues have been renewed, but I'm much more familiar with the refugee situations in East Africa because that's been the focus of my work for the last 10 years. So largely our work here at RIN in Africa is focused on Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia, which together account for several million refugees across those three countries. We also have a small program in Zambia.
Okay.
as well.
All right. So speaking of RIN, could you expound on how exactly you work with entrepreneurs?
Sure.
Is it technical? Do you give them finances?
So RIN, the Refugee Investment Network, was founded in 2018. And it came about because of sort of two parallel realizations. One, from the humanitarian side, is that the degree of displacement, or the number of people who are forcibly displaced globally, is far outpacing the amount of funding that's available to support those displaced people. And so if we have any hope of addressing the global displacement crisis, we're going to have to reach beyond humanitarian funding, and we're going to have to get the private sector involved. So that's the sort of the humanitarian, or maybe the moral argument for getting the private sector involved with refugees. But there's almost like a more cold-blooded mercenary argument you can make as well, which is that investors are always looking for the sort of diamond in the rough, right? That opportunity that no one else has seen yet. And we, believe, and RIN was founded on this idea that refugees represent that diamond in the rough. Refugees are incredibly entrepreneurial, incredibly hardworking. They tend to be extremely resilient because they've gone through displacement and often rebuilding their lives. But as often as a refugee, you don't have the option to just put something aside if once it gets difficult. Like you've got to tough it out. And so as a result, we feel that businesses that are run by refugees or that involve refugees in some way are often going to thrive. And so there's sort of a those two arguments, the humanitarian and the economic or financial, are the kind of the twin pillars that RIN is based on. So RIN was created in answer to those two drives. And we wanted to, I say we, I was not involved with RIN at that time. That was several years before I arrived. But the founders had this idea that we should be able to bring private capital to bear on businesses that are supporting refugees in some way. So that includes businesses that are, say, run by refugees, which is usually what people think of when we say Refugee-Lens investing. It's like, it's a refugee who set up a shop or whatever in a refugee camp. And that is part of it. But actually, the Refugee-Lens is very broad. And so it includes businesses that are run by refugees, which we call an R1 investment. But it also includes businesses where there are refugees in management positions. Businesses that are offering an essential service in a refugee camp or a refugee community, businesses that are hiring refugees, businesses that are sourcing their raw materials from refugees. Any business that is engaging refugees in a way that there is an economic benefit flowing to that refugee could be considered a Refugee-Lens investment. And so by directing private capital to that business, causing that business to expand, to grow, we're increasing the benefit that flows to refugees through that investment.
Okay, so speaking of Refugee-Lens investing, are there specific sectors that you focus on? I mean, with conventional investing, you'll see most investors, some focus on maybe agri-tech or fintech or climate change. So are there specific sectors that you're currently focusing on?
So at RIN, we are sector agnostic, and there are certain sectors where we tend to find more Refugee-Lens businesses. But from our perspective, what RIN cares about as an organization is seeing as much private capital as possible flow into businesses that are benefiting refugees in some way. So if that's a tech business, if that's an ag business, if that's working in manufacturing, you name it, we want to see capital flowing to those enterprises where refugees are engaged. Now, with that being said, certainly in East Africa, the I guess the largest clusters of Refugee-Lens businesses tend to be in a few key sectors. Agriculture is a big one because refugee populations tend to be in rural areas, and therefore it's easier to engage refugees if you're, if your business is around a large refugee community. So ag is a big one, but energy is also pretty significant. Technology, the sort of gig economy, online work, that sort of thing is actually a really fast growing sector. One we're seeing more and more organizations and companies that are identifying the fact that refugees have a lot of skills and with a small level of training can be plugged into online gig economy platforms and whatnot and can start making money where they are rather than having to move to a different location. So that's a growth area as well.
And have you seen any hesitance in the investor forums or from other investors to invest in refugees, maybe because they don't understand them, or and how then do you maneuver that to encourage more people to put in capital into refugee investing?
So Refugee-Lens investing is certainly, it's a category of sort of frontier. It's sort of the frontier of the frontier within impact investing, and so it often does require, or we often seek out investors who have a tolerance for doing things differently, taking on some risk, but just because an investment involves refugees doesn't mean it's inherently risky or or difficult. There's a huge range, and this is what I think often surprises people. When we start talking about Refugee-Lens investing, people will often think, "Oh, you're in some tiny refugee camp. It's who knows if we're going to get our money back." Like it's that may be true in some cases, but for every one of those, there are large energy companies, for example, that are setting up mini grids in Kakuma, or beauty salons that are hiring refugees in Kampala, that are not any more risky than any other investment that you might make. So I think there's a pretty broad range in terms of the risk profile, but I think what is true for Refugee-Lens investing is that it's new. And so often, when you introduce a new concept, a new idea, it often takes a little while for people to come around to it. And so that's what we see as our job, is to sort of say, okay, what sector as an investor, what sector are you involved or most interested in? What are the things that you really care about? What's your what level of comfort do you have with, a certain risk profile? And then we can help the investor identify, help them build their pipeline, build Refugee-Lens companies into their pipeline, that sort of thing. So that's sort of why we exist. And if it was easy, someone else would have done it.
Okay. And now you've mentioned impact investing, and I know in this space, investors mostly, even with the need to have impact, still some we need to see a financial return.
Absolutely.
And so what are some of the impact metrics that are used to prove impact in Refugee-Lens investing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the question of impact is really important because, as impact investors, that's you have a double bottom line, and you want to be able to demonstrate that this is not just pretty talk, that you're actually improving people's lives. Yeah. So we have developed a sort of an impact framework that we can partner with investors to apply if they're looking for metrics. Often investors already have their own impact metrics that they use. And so our job is then to think about, how do we help an investor incorporate the sort of refugee-specific metrics into their existing framework. Yeah. That's often sort of our job. But usually what we're looking at is sort of economic impact. So have you created a new job for a refugee?
Yeah.
Have you improved the quality of an existing job, either by raising someone's salary or by, for example, making it easier for a farmer to sell their produce on? But is there a measurable economic impact in that refugee's life or in their household? You can look at improved income and whatnot, improved consumption in some cases. And then there's a broader sort of category of impact, which is thinking about, like, have you just improved their life more generally? Do they have better access to certain goods and services? For example, if you're talking about an investment in an energy company in a refugee community, if they didn't have that community didn't have access to power before, and this, an investment in this company allows that community now to access electric power. They now have lights at night. The kids can study at night. They can keep food cold. All this sort of thing. That is a measurable improvement in that family's life. Even though it's hard to put an economic or a dollar figure on it. So those are the sort of three categories that we go for most immediately: jobs, improved income, and then a broader measure of improved life, improved quality of life.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. I think it is very hard for us to talk about refugees and refugee-lens investing while ignoring government.
Yeah.
And so around policy, with the countries, especially the African countries you've worked with, and considering that about 26% of the global population's refugees are in sub-Saharan Africa. So what country would you say has very friendly refugee policies? And what are you seeing governments do more or less in terms of supporting refugees to settle in the host countries?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think globally there is a lot of hesitation by countries everywhere to take in refugees. And so, it's certainly not an African phenomenon. I'm from the U.S. and it's a huge issue in the U.S. right now. Refugees and economic migrants, massive political, discussions and disputes over economic and migration policy in the U.S. So it's certainly not something that's limited to Africa by any means. And in fact, often in Africa, you do have very very progressive refugee policies. I mean, Uganda is a really interesting example of a country that has taken in, literally millions of refugees from South Sudan, from DRC. And in Uganda, refugees are allowed to work, are allowed freedom of movement. It's it's really quite impressive what the Ugandan government has done there, and sort of a model for the rest of the world, and certainly for the rest of the region. In Kenya, you have slightly more restrictive laws around movement of refugees. So refugees are supposed to stay within their camps and have to get a special pass if they want to move. In Kenya, refugees need to apply for a work permit if they want to work in the formal sector. So while that's possible, it makes things a little bit difficult, just because it's bureaucracy, it's expensive, it's often something that refugees are not, or struggle to get that permission. But I think in general, we do see a gradual movement across the region in the direction of more progressive refugee laws. Including in Kenya, the Sharika Plan, which is a sort of a countrywide effort to integrate refugees more into the communities where they live. So it's great to see these policies being passed at the sort of the national level. In 2021, 2022, we had a new Refugee Act passed in Kenya. And so it's great to see these policies passed at the sort of national level. And then we also want to make sure that those things are implemented locally. And often, between the law and the implementation is where the devil is in the details.
Yeah, sure. And for yourself, and after working with refugees, is there a specific policy that you feel has not yet been effected that you'd want to see brought up?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so obviously refugee law and refugee policy varies quite a bit from country to country. Since we're in Kenya, we can talk maybe first about Kenya. I would love to see a greater degree of openness to reducing the requirements for movement passes for refugees. So right now, refugees are largely sort of confined to the two large what used to be camps, now they're calling refugee settlements, Kakuma and Dadaab. So Kakuma is up in Turkana County, Dadaab in Garissa. And while there are about 15% of the refugees who live in Kenya are in urban settings in Nairobi or in Mombasa, the majority, 85%, are in camps, and they are restricted from leaving those camps. If you're a refugee entrepreneur and you want to get supplies for your business, you have to apply for a permit to leave the camp. And then when you get that, it's for a certain amount of time. You can go for 1 week. You can go to Nairobi on these days, and you need to come back. And so you can imagine, as an entrepreneur, if you're trying to run a business and you have to apply every time you want to leave your town, for example, very hard to run a business. So we would love to see greater openness there. I think, at this stage, it doesn't seem like that's that's going to be in the short term. That's going to be a policy change that's going to happen in the short term, I should say. But it's something we would, love to see happen, and something we'll continue to advocate for.
Okay. And so now, getting back to your work with entrepreneurs, I mean, I know so many natives or Kenyans or Ugandans never really think about what happens to refugees, how do they live, because most people assume they just survive on humanitarian aid, children grow in the camps, go to school in the camps, but not really much information on whether they are able to establish good businesses. And so could you give us at least maybe 2 case studies of businesses you've worked with and Refugee-Lens investing and the success and the impact that you've seen with those businesses?
Sure. Yeah. So, and I think what you've described, which is, people living in camps or refugee communities and often having to survive on humanitarian aid, that is true for many refugees. And I think what RIN really attempts to do is to help people see the other side, which is that while many refugees are sort of surviving on humanitarian aid, many are starting their own businesses or going out and finding work to the extent that they're able. And so I can give you a couple of examples of Refugee-Lens businesses at different levels. So we call an investment into a company that's owned by or run by refugees. We call it an R1 investment. We have something called the Refugee-Lens, which is essentially a taxonomy to say this is what counts as a Refugee-Lens investment. And basically, it stipulates that if you make an investment in this company, that there will be a significant, sizable benefit that flows through to refugees in some way. So an R1 investment would be an investment into a company owned by refugees. An example of that is a woman I was just speaking with yesterday. She's in Kampala. She's a refugee from Ethiopia. She runs a small home-based business that is making shea butter based beauty products. So she has 4 products that she makes. She's done really well. She's, very skilled. Her business is growing. But she's basically gotten to the limit of what she can produce. And everything she makes, she can sell pretty well. But she's gotten to the limit of what she can produce within her kind of house. She's basically running this business out of her kitchen. And so she's now, she came to us looking for support both kind of some business development support to help her, think about the smartest way to expand her production, but an investment. And so, but the size of the investment in her case would be very, very small, right? Because it's a home-based business that she's looking to expand beyond the home, scale her production capacity, probably a loan of, maybe $5,000, $10,000, maybe $15,000 that she'd be looking for. And with that and some business development support, I think she'll be able to expand her business, ramp up, maybe bring on some additional staff, hire some additional people. And, I think she'll do great. We have are in the process of putting her in touch with a couple of microfinance institutions that can provide sort of loans of that size, and then also organizations. What I'd love to be able to do is to get her into an incubator or an accelerator of some sort. But for right now, we're trying to help her get access to finance first, and then see where that goes. So that's an example of an R1 investment. An example of, and it's very small, so maybe a medium-size example would be an R3 investment, which is a company that is hiring refugees or providing an essential service in a refugee community. And this would be, for example, a company that runs a number of salons in Kampala.
Okay.
They sort of by accident, they initially, in one of their salons, they hired a woman who's a refugee from Congo and was extremely skilled with doing hair. And what they found is that many of that woman was living in a refugee camp nearby Kampala. She said, yeah, all of my, we have lots of friends and they're all really good at this. And so this company just started hiring refugees, not because, they felt like, oh, we feel bad for these people, we're going to give them a handout, but they're just the best at what they do. They're literally the most skilled people in this particular sector. And so the company really grew on the strength of hiring refugees. And they have about, I think, 6 salons across Kampala. And when we spoke to them last time, they were looking for an investment of several $1 million so that they could expand to other parts of the country. And they said that, hiring refugees will continue to be sort of a core part of how they ensure they have the best talent in their salons to do hair and whatnot. So there you're looking at, $4 or $5 million investment, I believe. And that would be, they're looking at a combination of equity and debt. And then a third example, which is sort of, at another level, again, would be we've been speaking with an energy company that does, they run mini grids, basically. They set up solar-powered mini grids, and they've already set up several pretty large mini grids in Kakuma camp in Turkana. And they are looking to expand the size of their grid, setting up more solar panels and wiring up more houses across all of Kakuma, and they're in the middle of a fundraise to expand their work into Dadaab. Again, they're looking for, it's a combination of equity and debt, and they're currently I think they're still in the middle of their raise, and they're looking for around a $30 million investment to expand.
It's a huge investment.
So it's pretty significant, yeah. And this is it's a U.S.-based solar power company that sees this, opportunity. The interesting thing about power is that people are happy and willing to pay. If you hook up a home and you provide a consistent electricity source, there are plenty of people that are willing to pay on a monthly basis for power. And so it's, that's a very investable project. Okay. So those are sort of 3 different levels, the individual entrepreneur,
very dynamic.
The salon, that's sort of a sort of growth stage, and then this, large power program in northern Kenya.
Okay.
And so I guess that's what I mean when I say, we're really interested in the full range of of capital. Everything from microfinance through to deals with multi-million-dollar deals with, say, more institutional investors.
Okay. All right. So, Danny, and so entrepreneurs that are looking or wishing to be considered under this Refugee-Lens investing, how then can they position themselves? Because sometimes lack of information is what hinders entrepreneurs from getting these opportunities. So how would they position themselves for this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, we're not an investor. RIN is not an investor, but we exist to try to connect businesses that are working with refugees to investors that are interested in seeing their investments impact refugees. And so, if you're an entrepreneur, if you run a business, if you're currently working with refugees, and you're looking for investment, like, we'd love to hear from you. We have our an email address on our website. If you go to refugee-investments.org, you can write in. We monitor that fairly closely. And a lot of people will get in touch with us and just say, "Hey, I run this business. I work in this place. I'm wondering if you can help me." And in some cases, we're able to connect people. In other cases, maybe it's not a perfect fit, or we can't find the right investor, or the business, needs some additional support before they're ready to receive an investment. But that's one easy way to sort of reach out and get in touch. And in many cases, we've also spoken with businesses that don't currently work with refugees, but have said, well, we are working in or around this refugee camp or community, and we would like to bring refugees into our value chain in some way. And so for that, we've set up something called the Refugee Technical Assistance Facility, which basically allows us to work with a company that is interested to engage refugees and help them figure out, what's stopping them. Because often there's some issue, there's a reason they haven't tried it already. There's an issue with, say, documentation, or there's a problem with, with where the refugee camp is located, in comparison to where their factory is or whatever. And so sometimes we can come alongside those companies and help them figure out how to get over a particular issue that allow them to engage refugees as customers, or to start hiring more refugees or whatever. And then they go from, that's how a company can become a Refugee-Lens company. And then once they become a Refugee-Lens company, then we can then start introducing them to, additional investors that are interested to see that refugee-specific impact.
And so, and how does that process look like? Does it take time, or it's usually dependent?
Well, so we did a pilot of the technical assistance facility last year, and we worked with 3 companies, and it went really well. Like, across the 3 companies, I think we were able to engage something like 11,000 refugees, either through the companies hiring additional refugees, or sourcing their materials from additional refugees, or whatever, over the course of about less than 6 months. So it was really cool to see the sort of response. We sit down with a company and they say, "We'd love to work with refugees, but there's this problem and we can't get around it." So then we say, "Okay, maybe we can help you solve that." I can give you an example. So we were working with a large agri processor in Uganda. They do a lot of their work is like large scale mechanized farming, but they also have they work with thousands and thousands of small scale farmers, where they'll provide the agricultural inputs, and then they do the offtake. So they'll provide input, they'll provide seeds, fertilizer, pesticides. When the farmer grows the crop, often it's soybeans, but they do a number of different products. Then they'll say, "Okay, we'll guarantee a certain price, and we'll buy the buy the output from you at the end," and then they do the processing. And so they said several of their centers are right near refugee communities in northern Uganda, but the refugee farmers in those areas tended to have smaller plot sizes than the Ugandan farmers. And they said the sort of protocol that we've developed to engage farmers, we need to have a minimum plot size of, I can't remember what it was, 1.5 or 2 acres. And the average refugee plot size is less than 1 acre. So we said, okay. And we sat down with them and we figured out that we could bring in an agronomist to help them figure out how to change up the protocol and identify some new products that they could sort of profitably grow on smaller plot sizes. And so then with that new product and with that new protocol, we're able to then go to refugee farmers that had smaller plot sizes and start working with them at a larger scale. So that's one example of sort of, by solving one particular problem that, the protocol doesn't work on plot sizes below a certain size. If we can solve that problem, then suddenly there's thousands of refugee farmers that have these smaller plot sizes that the company can then start engaging with. And so it has a real long-term, large-scale impact. So that was really exciting.
Oh, okay. And so I know some entrepreneurs are on the lookout for grants and donor funds that are not debt or equity, especially for those ones that have very small businesses. And maybe because you're in that space, maybe you could comment on grant funding, because that has been coming down significantly. And I think there are more restrictions on what exactly they are looking out for. And so for investors that want that kind of support, how would you tell them to structure their business for them to be attractive to donor and grant funding?
Yeah. So, we do a lot of work with what we call blended finance, right? Where we're doing, we're using grants, hopefully intelligently, in order to offset a particular, barrier or problem that's stopping a business from being able to access more commercial capital. And sometimes that, if it's well designed, a blend of grant funding and and returnable capital can allow businesses to thrive in ways that just that just straight debt or equity would not. So that's great. I think to some degree, grants can be a double-edged sword in that in some cases, we see this a lot in refugee communities where you have a ton of NGOs that are that are giving out grants to help refugee entrepreneurs start businesses. I think it's a great idea, and I've as someone who's worked with NGOs for years, I've done this myself as well. It's like, well, give people a grant to get started, and then they'll start their business, and then they'll be able to expand. And sometimes that works, but often what we see is a business that gets reliant on receiving grants all the time. Then you can only grow to a certain stage, and then if you're not used to the sort of discipline of being able to take on a loan and repay that, really hard to expand beyond a certain point. And so, I think it's an important, working with grant capital is an important component of Refugee-Lens investing, but it's something that we want to be able to use very carefully, so as to avoid sort of muddying the waters. And quite often, there's a lot of well-meaning work done by humanitarian institutions that does make it quite difficult for actual businesses to thrive. So, as an example, I was talking to a company that manufactures and sells solar lamps, and they were looking to expand into Kakuma to start, set up shop there. It's kind of expensive because Kakuma is a long ways from Nairobi, but they were like, we're going to set up, some sales agents there. We know there's a big demand for solar lamps. You've got hundreds of thousands of people in Kakuma. And so they went and set up shop and they were doing well. And then about 3 months later, there was a large donor-funded program that came in and said, look, we're, solar lamps allow girls to study at night. And so we're going to give every girl on the campus solar lamp. So 100,000 solar lamps were given out.
Yeah.
And of course, the business straight down. And it's over.
True.
And so, in that case, you've, on the one hand, how could you deny giving a refugee girl, a solar lamp? On the other hand, from the perspective of the business owner trying to set up and run a small business selling lamps, it's devastating. Yeah. So that's what I mean when I say grant funding can be a double-edged sword.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Danny. So as we close this discussion, maybe you could tell us, if you had $1 billion today, how would you use that money to change the fate of refugee investors or refugee entrepreneurs, that is?
Question. Yeah. I mean, I think there's more and more evidence that there are, excellent refugee-lens investment opportunities out there. And so I think if I did have a lot of money, I would want to, set up an RLI, a refugee-lens investing fund, basically, and it's not like this hasn't been done before. I mean, but I'd love to be able to really do it at scale, and do it across, across East Africa, maybe across all of Africa. There are some great existing funds that are using a refugee lens for some of their products, and there's a few funds that are only investing in refugee lens businesses. So it's great to see that growth. Like if you go back a few years, we were sort of advocating for this, but there were not that many actual funds or investors that were just focusing on refugees. Nowadays you're seeing more and more pop up. Yeah. And if I had a lot of money, I'd love to use that to really drive scale in the refugee lens investing space.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Danny, for taking your time. We really enjoyed the conversation. And thank you for giving us a different perspective of looking at refugees, not just as a crisis, as people who need help, but as people who can partner with us and partner with governments and partner with local communities to create jobs, create minimum income, and drive the economic growth forward.
Absolutely.
Thank you to our listeners. If you found this discussion engaging and inspirational to you, please share it on your socials, leave a comment to us, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks.